Hey everybody, this is Aaron from aaronsAudiocorner.com, and today I'm going to review the Philharmonic BMR Mini Tower speaker. This speaker design comes from us courtesy of Dennis Murphy. I believe it was unveiled around 2015 or 2016, but to be honest, I'm not quite sure of the lineage there. I just know that's when I started seeing more about it. Initially, it was available from Dennis direct in a full completed cabinet just like this. And over time, I believe that Dennis had to maybe step back from it. I don't know all the details, but bottom line is right now, if you wanted to go out and purchase this, you can do that through Salk Sound. And I think the completed price is about $2,400, give or take. Or you can build the kit version yourself from Meniscus, where you would buy the drivers and the crossover. And then there's another website that sells the cabinet itself, which would be CNC cut. I believe they are speakerhardware.com, but we'll touch on that on my website in a little bit. The main thing I want to get to right now is, yes, this is a DIY design. Again, it was designed by Dennis Murphy, and it incorporates a Scanspeak Classic 7-inch or so woofer. It incorporates a Tectonics BMR mid-range, and it also incorporates the RAAL ribbon tweeter. And the combination of these speakers is really high-end. So the RAAL is very well known and well regarded. The Scanspeak Classic line, anything Scanspeak makes in my book is great. I've never had any issue with them. You always get exactly what you expect to get for the money. The BMR is kind of the low man on the totem pole. Now, I tested a 2.5-inch BMR a few years ago. Tectonic actually sent me one directly before they were even available to purchase here. My results, I was very, very impressed. The way that this speaker plays with the flat cone, it doesn't break up like a typical cone driver does. And in doing so, it actually is enabled to extend its high frequency response even further out without beaming traditionally, or like a traditional cone woofer would or a cone driver would. Unfortunately, the sensitivity of that driver was really, really low. It was about 78 dB at 2.83 volts. And some of those characteristics obviously are carried over to the larger size, and this is either a 3 or a 4-inch. Somebody would have to verify. The sensitivity on this driver, I think, is about 83 dB, and the Scanspeak is about 87 dB. So when you put the Scanspeak on a baffle and you use baffle step compensation, that actually lowers its effective output down to closer to what the BMR is. So the overall sensitivity of the speaker is about 83 dB. I measured it. We'll get to that later. So that's the real drawback for me of this particular speaker, but everything else is really, really impeccable about the speaker. The way the dispersion is, with all of these speakers used and crossed over correctly, the dispersion pattern of this speaker remains very wide. I think it's like plus or minus 90 degrees. And I think at worst it's about plus or minus 60 degrees up in the upper treble region. And then above about 10K, it starts to fall off and becomes a little bit more narrow. But its horizontal dispersion is just uncanny, all thanks to this ribbon tweeter and its narrow, I won't say diameter, but its width. The flip side of that, however, is because it's tall, it beams like a 4-inch or so driver. That limits your vertical window. So that means that when you're listening to this speaker, you need to be on axis with that tweeter, because if you stand up plus or minus 10 degrees, or you sit down minus 10 degrees, you're going to be outside of that sweet spot for this speaker. That's the only other drawback that I can think of about the actual design. But I gotta say, I didn't really have an issue with that in my listening evaluation. I don't really recall noticing anything that I could say, yeah, that's absolutely because of the vertical tweeter dispersion, because I maintained my ears to be on axis with the tweeter itself vertically. So let me flip to some of my notes here, and because I have a terrible memory. Well, first of all, let me just say that this speaker really impressed the heck out of me. The resolution on this speaker is like nothing I've ever heard in my life. And again, I've heard quite a bit of fair systems. The intelligibility, the diction, I mean, I don't know. It's like just the speech of lyricists or vocalists. Some of the words they were saying came out so defined and so crisp. It was almost like somebody took a person talking to me and then extracted all the external noise that you would ever hear, and it was solely their voice, and they just enhanced the crap out of it. That's kind of how this speaker made me feel, and I think that's due in large part, at least, to the RAAL tweeter here. So, but my notes, I said Depeche Mode was really nice, punchy in the bass. When he says girl, there's very nice modulation. He's a girl, and I could hear the modulation in his voice. I was like, what the heck? I've never heard that. That was really cool. Steve Winwood's Higher Love. I cranked this sucker up to about 95 dB at my listening position. Didn't sweat it at all, and it was freaking awesome. I got goosebumps from listening to it. Shaka Khan's voice in the background toward the end of the track was just unreal. It just sounded so pristine. And I'm gonna try to be kind of quick with this because I've got all this information on my website. One thing I wish there was more of was about the 10 to 12 kHz range. I felt like it was missing some air and a little bit of crackle up top, and I noticed that using Magic by the Cars. I listened to John Mayer's version of Tom Petty's Free Fallin', and that sounded awesome. So I flipped the lights off so I could listen to that one and just focus on the music only instead of staring, at a blank wall. That sounded amazing, okay? Peter Gabriel's Sledgehammer, there's a part where he said you could have had an airplane. When he says the word could, I don't know how to describe it other than just there was so much emphasis on the k portion of could. It just popped out at me, and I've never heard that kind of detail in this track. Again, it's one I use so much. I listen to Police Wrapped Around Your Finger, the opening bass. I think there's a 3-chord progression. Whatever. The early bass notes in that track, just you can hear them go doom 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 doom. It was just awesome, right? And I'm really fun at subjective stuff because I go doom 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 doom. I do wish there was a little bit more in the 2 to 3 kHz region, just to give it a little bit more definition. The soundstage depth on Paul Simon's track Kodachrome, I could hear the drummer on the left of the stage far behind the speaker, and that stood out to me as a positive. Again, I really noticed that there was just a lot of resolution. I guess is the best word to put it. Just resolution, just detail in the upper mid-range, lower treble region. And I think the only other area that I kind of had an issue with was it seemed a little bit resonant around 250 to 300 hertz, and I thought maybe that was just me, but after looking through the data, I actually found where that kind of showed its head a little bit, and I'll try to touch on that a little bit later. Output-wise, these things got almost to 100 dB at my listening position. I think 98 dB was about where I capped it off at, and by say capped it off at, I mean I kept turning the volume up, but 98 dB was about where it would max out at using some newer like 24 Karat Magic by Bruno Mars or Lauryn Hill's Doo-Wop. Those tracks kind of said, okay, 98 dB is about it. But subjectively speaking, I'm not going to be one of those dudes that gets on these videos and uses all the crazy superlatives. I'm just going to tell you that if you had the opportunity to build a speaker or listen to a speaker, you should absolutely do it. I think that at its kit price, it's an absolute no-brainer. I think that at Salk Sound's completed price, it's still a good value. Personally, I would rather save $1,000 and build it myself. But if you're somebody who just wants off the shelf ready to go right now, you absolutely should give the speaker a try. Hopefully they have some kind of warranty or trial period where you can do that. But yeah, Dennis Murphy did an incredible job on this speaker. And I'm just going to flip it around to the back real fast before I roll to the data. There is a port. The enclosure is tuned to the mid to low 30 hertz region, and it's a pretty large port. I heard no chuffing, no huffing from the port, so it was mechanically speaking, it was a very quiet speaker. And yeah, so let's get to the objective portion. So I'm on my website. I am in the review. Here's a bunch of stuff. I'll point this out. So here's where I say you can purchase it for about $2,400 depending on the condition of the finish. Fully assembled, you could buy all the parts for around $1,500 or so, shipped to your door, and then put it together yourself. Or if you want to cut the wood and just buy the components, you could do for about $1,150, $1,200. And impedance, so you're going to need a separate amplifier that can handle a 4 ohm load. Let's see here. All right, now this is really good. The mean SPL I calculated from 300 hertz to 3 kilohertz was about 83 dB. Not great. You're going to need an amplifier to power it for sure, just for that reason alone. But the linearity of the speaker is plus or minus 1.5 dB practically all the way through from about 80 hertz and on. That's really good. I mean, to have a plus or minus 1.5 dB speaker is a really good thing. And here's the off-axis response, and I'll show you the part where I noticed the 250 hertz region sounded a little bit resonant is right around here. So you can kind of see where these start to tick and come back up. That's kind of an indication of maybe a resonance there. And yeah, I heard what or at least I thought I heard that. So that kind of seems to confirm that maybe that indeed was what I was hearing. Again, this is normalized. But let's blow down to the bottom. So I don't want to look at these. I want to go to the horizontal polar. This is what I was talking about earlier with the width of the horizontal radiation pattern. This thing is easily plus or minus 60 degrees horizontally. So if you're listening out here from, you know, the lowest frequencies all the way up to almost the highest frequencies, and at some points it's almost out to plus or minus 90 degrees. This is a very, very wide speaker, which means that as far as placement goes and as far as seating goes, you have a lot of luxury to put things kind of where you want to, at least as far as turning the speaker. You know, you don't necessarily have to turn it on axis. You can turn it off axis if you want to. Turning it on axis will get you a little bit more of the, what is this, the 8K or maybe the 10K plus hertz region. But as long as you're within, I'd say plus or minus 40 degrees, it don't matter what you do. When you get to plus or minus 60 degrees, it starts to become a little bit more, I guess, temperamental about placement. But even still, it's not bad at all. Now we're going to look at vertically. The vertical window, about plus or minus 10 degrees, all the way out to 20K. And we're going to say if you stop that at 13K, then you're about plus or minus 20 degrees. And below that, you're about plus or minus 30. It's just the vertical window narrows. So ideally, you want to be plus or minus 10 degrees on the speaker vertically, and that'll put you in the good sweet spot. Spinorama data, very nice. You know, I'm not going to say dead flat, but relatively speaking, flat linearity. As we discussed earlier, it's plus or minus 1.5 dB across the board. And the listening window is almost on target with the on-axis response, except for in the crossover region. Now that could be vertical, but I think it's more to do with the horizontal dispersion. And we're going to go down. Early reflections curve, if you guys want to look at that. Predicted curve. Now this predicted curve tends to indicate that this speaker is going to be bright. However, there is a shelving of about 1 or 2 dB below about 300 hertz, and at least in the bass region. And because of that, my target line starts about 1 dB or so down than it should. And I will say that because the speaker's horizontal pattern is so wide, it makes me wonder how well a prediction curve actually works for a speaker like this. Because I got to tell you, even though I thought it was a little bit hot in the treble region, I only thought it was like maybe 1 dB hot. It didn't sound extremely hot to me. But this graphic seems to indicate that it would be, you know, maybe as much as 3 to 4 dB too high. I just didn't hear that. And I think, again, that's kind of a downside potentially of this speaker's radiation pattern rolled up into this way of providing the data, also compared with that shelving of the bass. So if that shelving of the bass was bumped up a little bit, this line would be up here and it would close the gap a little bit more. Regardless, it's a really good linear speaker. Distortion wise, I didn't really hear anything that bothered me, but we are seeing, as you expect, the low frequency distortion increases as you give it more output. I mean, that's understood. We all know that you crank up bass, you're going to get more distortion down there. The one that stands out to most people is in this 3K hertz region, and that seems, from all indications, to be caused by the RAAL tweeter, but I didn't hear any distortion. However, on the flip side, I do kind of wonder, people always say second order distortion is pleasant to the ear. When I went digging into this data, second order distortion was the primary cause for this higher frequency distortion. And I do wonder if the resolution that I was hearing might have had something to do with this higher frequency distortion, or was it all solely based on the RAAL ribbon itself? I don't know. I tend to not think that it was distortion, but that's just kind of a side thought for people to chew on. If you got any inputs there, feel free to throw them out my way. Compression, same thing. You kind of have a peak of compression around, it's actually an enhancement around 3 kilohertz as well. I didn't really hear anything in that region. If I were to go back and listen now, having seen the data, I might possibly, but I can tell you that honestly, my assessment, I didn't hear anything there. For max SPL testing, I do 2 different testing, one from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz and one from 80 to 20 kilohertz. And in general, let's just roll straight down to the results. I said the max output was 99 dB from 20 to 20K or 102 dB at 1 meter from 80 to 20K. That's some significant output. So can't really fault the speaker there in that regard. And I do believe that that's kind of a stringent test. Step input. This is where you want to see are all the speakers time aligned. And in this case, you can see that unfortunately they are not. I have to think that if they were time aligned, that there would be a more coherent soundstage to this speaker, and that would probably raise its level of performance up a notch. But I don't know how much money it would cost to incorporate something like that in a crossover. I mean, I've always pretty much dealt with active crossovers, so I don't have much experience there in passive crossovers to say. And then my subjective evaluation, which I've already told you. Here's all my music that I listen to, and kind of here's more of a rundown if you want to go and read it. But I'm going to say the bottom line is, if you've got the money, if you're interested in DIY and you've got the money to DIY, you should absolutely consider this speaker as an option. If you have the money to buy it outright and you just don't have the skill or the time to DIY, then still consider this speaker. Having said all of that, this design is kind of old news. I wanted to do this video to give Dennis some credit because I believe this is a speaker that's worth people taking the time to at least understand. From what I understand now, Dennis is working on a updated design and going to incorporate a couple different drivers and may do some other things outside of that. So this should be improved in a new iteration. Don't know when it's coming, but just kind of keep an eye out for it. And yeah, very good speaker. Very happy with it. Huge wide sound stage. Depth is really nice. Tonality was to my liking, other than a couple things here and there. Very pleasant speaker. It is a large speaker. It is not a typical bookshelf speaker, so make sure you have room for it. Make sure you have an amplifier for it. And then buy it, crank it, enjoy it, and that's it. Take care, y'all. Bye.